Welcome to Complex Creatures, exploring spirituality and the common good.
I am from Central Illinois. The soil where I'm from is some of the very best soil in the world. It's deep, dense, rich, black, and I never ever saw it as a thing of beauty until I was transplanted to other parts of the country where the soil was more like clay, dustier, sometimes rocky, shale, and just rocks kind of all throughout the whole patch of land. Until I experienced that trying to grow things, I didn't quite get a handle on how beautiful the space was where I'm from. Now when I go back home and I survey the landscape, I just see that black, rich soil as something of beauty to look at. I'm told that many, many moons ago, before big agriculture and the industrial farm system that does monocultures, that doesn't rotate crops, that uses too many chemicals, that it's caused so much erosion. Before all of that became the norm in our society, I'm told that topsoil was about 10 to 12 foot deep. Now in many places, it's only 6 inches to 12 inches. And that's because of the erosion that I mentioned, but it's also because a lot of that great soil has been stripped and sold and sent elsewhere. I read something once where when Amish communities, and there are some in Central Illinois, not as much as Pennsylvania or Ohio, but there are some. I'm told that when they purchased a piece of land that had been once farmed in this industrial way by farmers who live by government subsidies to grow only soy and corn, I'm told that when they take that land into their possession, they think it takes about 8 to 10 years to make the soil truly healthy again, by layering on healthy ingredients to the soil, by letting it lie fallow and having its rest, and by continuing applying new things, whether it's decaying organic material that will add nitrogen to the soil, or putting in winter crops that will take nutrients from the air and pull them into the root systems, or laying manure. It takes that long to make the soil vibrant, rich, and healthy again. To know what plants need is to know what the soil needs, and to know what the soil needs takes your time and your attention. Here at Complex Creatures, we like to think about the human animal and all of its complexity, including its penchant, our penchant for spirituality. I know spirituality is often seen as a personal pursuit, but we have a belief that it's a tool, an under-tapped tool for the common good. One of the things that I like to point out about spirituality is that at base, it is at least how we connect to that which is bigger than ourselves, that which is greater than ourselves. So if that's all true, and I think at the very simplest, spirituality is at least that, then how could you see your relationship to the land or your food sources as anything but one of the most important spiritual connections that you can imagine? Today on the show, on Complex Creatures, we're going to have a conversation with Reverend Megan Huston and her husband, Willie. Megan is a pastor at First Christian Church in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Her husband, Willie, is a regenerative farmer, and they have 2 8-year-old twin girls who farm alongside of them. Currently, they live on 13 acres there in Rockfield, Kentucky, but they're going to be moving to a piece of land just down the road, a little bit larger, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Currently, they raise they're going to be raising larger animals there, and currently Willie is a subject of a short documentary, which is still being filmed, I'm told. It's called Willie and Pigs. It's about the process of raising the pigs and then processing them for meat, what it means to raise and eat animals that you also grow a deep connection with as you raise them. Notice I didn't say Willie grows pigs, he raises them. One term being that of industrial agriculture, the other a more traditional term and more appropriate, I think. Well, I hope you enjoy this conversation, and I hope it makes you ask questions about how you connect, not only with the land around you, the spaces that you think you possess, because maybe they possess you, I hope it makes you think about the food sources and what it takes to produce the food that you eat and the life that's really given when you eat it. I hope it makes you think about growing something and maybe just taking stock. I hope it makes you think deeply about how we can navigate this world with an attention to the citizens of the world, and maybe those citizens are not just humans. I hope it makes you think about more. Listen to this conversation, please. Pastor Megan and Willie Huston, it's good to meet you both today and have you here on Complex Creatures. We have a relationship from other areas, Megan, so we've talked a little bit about what you and Willie do for your lifestyle and regenerative farming and being close to your food sources. But can y'all just share with us today what it is that your life is like in terms of the land that you live on and what you do with it, and why? Why do you live so closely to the land and intentionally the way you do?
Yeah, of course, there's this ethic, this Wendell Berry sort of ethic, and some mentors had sent me, the right Wendell Berry book at the right time to get into the regenerative side of relationship to the land and food and things. But then, from a theological standpoint, you talk about we have an atheist neighbor as well, and we've done some work with them on the land, and it's this great collaboration because we're right across the creek from one another. But I think about Judy.
They're our best friends.
Yeah. I think about Judy Kiernan and Thomas Berry, unrelated to Wendell Berry, who have this land theological. One's spiritual, comes from a religious perspective, and then Judy's more of like atheist, but also this greater connectivity, universal connectivity. And the only reason I mention that is because I really try to listen and go as the land goes, and I think that's the definition of regenerative. One of them is to know what the land needs, which is like diversity, and good community, not just with microbes to clear to the human level. And so for me, it's it's the poetry in motion, with from the forest north slope across the creek to the land, the moving of the animals and the pollinators, the wildflowers, and I feel like there's this deep respect, and there's this collaboration going on with those neighbors as well. And so I'm reading the book Serviceberry. It's Robin Wall Kimmerer's new book, and it's about this gift economy, and so. And I forgot who it was, but there's a podcast I listened to with this guy talking about we need to farm like a tree, and that's this whole rooted, not going too far, being concerned with the neighbors, and nearby and things like that. So I think, in short, for me, it's a poetry in motion, and the girls are two twins. Who ironically, so one of the first things we did in the forest together is collect acorns. And so I have videos and pictures of that. It's just kind of a precious thing because the oak is the most important overstory species that we have, as far as it hosting, I think, up to 585 species. So from fungi to, the insects and things like that. But it's important. So in a spiritual level, when they were born, right outside their window in town were two old growth twin oaks. And they were born on Arbor Day. So I feel like there may be nothing related there, but there's this kind of grounding, this spiritual Judy Kiernan kind of ideology or theology that exists as well. Anyways, that's
Willie. You sound drawn. You sound drawn to the land, and I just the way you even try to talk about the land that you have. You just started talking about it with almost an affectionate quality. So the north slope, I think you say. You started describing. I started seeing in my own mind's eye a little bit about your land. I'm curious, what was the right Wendell Berry book at the right time? What book? Do you remember the book that?
Question.
Yeah,
because I'm a huge Wendell Berry fan, and I know that you live in the same state. Maybe have you ever met Wendell Berry?
We have.
we have. We were fortunate to be in a meeting with him in a church group, actually, and got to ask some really poignant questions about some pieces of property there and things, and And so I just remember him saying the most important thing he said in response to a question that a colleague had asked about how do you keep going in this world that seems to be falling apart even more. You seem pessimistic, but you're full of hopes yet, even with all the battles you've gone through, the federal government and, lost a lot of those battles and on this and that. Well, his response was, there's enough beauty left.
Yes, I'm sorry to interject, but I really love some line in some poem where he says everything we need is already here. Like he has this mentality. I remember long before Elon Musk was political, so I'm not trying to be political right now, but long before this, he was promoting a vision of occupying Mars because he said, we already used up Earth. There's no returning. My uncle works for SpaceX, right? He worked for SpaceX. So he would tell me all this stuff and I was just cringe. And I'd say, no, like it's not used up. And in fact, all we need is already here. I quoted Wendell Berry. It's just the way we think and the way we engage. And I feel like that economy is there in Wendell Berry that you just described. There's enough beauty still here, right? That's what you were saying. And I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Do you remember that book, Willie, though? I still want to get you on that if you remember that book.
It was The Unsettling of America, Culture and Agriculture. Have you read that? Yeah.
Yeah, that book shook me up too. Megan, Pastor Megan, you are a minister, and because of that, I suspect that you already have a desire for caring for what is God's creation, but was living in such a way close to the land, on such a large acreage, raising food that you do. Was that a part of your heart before you met Willie, or did he help you with that?
I think definitely that's something that Willie introduced to me. I mean, I've always been comfortable in the outdoors, like I grew up tent camping and going to national parks and, growing up, I lived out in the country, but not on a working farm, if that makes sense. So I think one of the things that Willie introduced me to, because he's from the Northwest, people in the Northwest I've noticed have just like a totally different relationship with geography, if that makes sense. Like Willie leaving the mountains was a whole thing. Like he left the mountains long before I met him, but the way he relates to the land has always been different than anything I ever understood or knew growing up. But I can see it in like his family and other people from the Northwest. And I think that's maybe why a lot of people in the Pacific Northwest are like explicitly non-church goers. There's statistics around that. And I think that's like nature is their spirituality. And so Willie and I met at Div School, actually. So faith was always like a common component for us. Definitely came into play when I met Willie. Just sort of a so we met in Div School, we got engaged. I got called to my first church before I graduated, and then he came and joined me a few months later, and we got married. And but my mentor, so I was an intern with Week of Compassion. And my
Can we
mentor
pause
was
real
Johnny
quick? I just want
Ray.
to say Week of Compassion is a Disciples of Christ ministry that serves areas of national disasters. Just for those of you not familiar with the lingo. And Div School's Divinity School. Just no, that's cool. It's cool.
So my mentor through Week of Compassion asked me to go preach at a church in Paris, Tennessee. And I thought I was just going on assignment because that's what I was doing when I was interning there. But then the week before, they're like, no, we don't want you to preach about Week of Compassion. We just want you to bring the good news. And I was like, what? And then they were like, and then Johnny said, yeah, they're looking for a pastor. And this was like probably March, and I was going to graduate in December, but I had no desire to go into congregational ministry, like none. And I had only preached, like probably 3 times in my life I had preached at that point.
Wow.
And so I prayed about it. and had a pretty intense like God moment around preparing for that sermon because I was in my only homiletics course, which was preaching social justice. I like skipped the intro to homiletics and did this one because it was around social justice. And I really like that's what I was doing with Week of Compassion too, as I was traveling and preaching about our relief, refugee, and development ministry. So my heart, I wanted to go overseas. I wanted to do international development work. And I will say, like, the common thread would probably be sustainability. So, like, the things that I've learned alongside Willie about the land are the same concepts that we were thinking about people. Like, we don't need to teach, we don't need to feed the world. People know how to feed themselves. We just need to make like a fair playing field, right? So, I don't know. I think the way we relate to the land had some commonalities with the stuff I was into and studying when I was in divinity school. So I ended up being called to First Christian in Paris. Johnny stayed my mentor. We would travel down to his farm. And well, right around the time that I went to First Christian in Paris, where he had actually served that congregation for 7 or 8 years before he was called to Week of Compassion. So we had this thing in common that brought us closer together. He preached my installation, and then we would go visit Mississippi. And at that point, I think it was more of he was my ministry mentor.
Right.
Sort of organically, slowly, so Johnny, when he left Week of Compassion, he wasn't retiring. He was choosing to farm. He felt like his work at Week of Compassion was complete. He had bought this little farm in Mississippi in the same area he grew up in, like in the 80s, and it just had a little A-frame house on it. And he had kept this property all this time, would go back and visit. It's really amazing to me that he was able to keep up with that property while living in Indianapolis and having this really demanding job. But his calling, his longing, his heart's longing was to get back to the place where he was from, to his land. And he started raising grass-fed beef, was really where they dove in. And so as he was kind of like starting, he had the farm for a long time, but he was starting that as a full-time venture. When I was starting congregational ministry. So like I was going to him to be my ministry mentor, but he ended up becoming Willie's farming mentor. So Johnny gave him the Wendellberry book, and we, continued to stay close to Johnny and visit down there and see their working farm. He would be a great person for you to talk to about. He and Deborah worked for the pension fund forever, his wife, but they just like dropped everything in Indianapolis. And Deb, who's I don't think Deb ever grew up, and I think she always grew up in more urban areas, just like dropped everything and just homesteads now, basically. She's doing the farm business with Johnny, and that place is so sacred. They call it High Hope Farm, and it's such sacred ground. And I think that sort of planted a seed in us of like a future that we could imagine for ourselves, especially, and for me, my calling in the farm world is not like, Jared, full-time ministry is so demanding, and we have 8-year-old twins. I don't have, I'm not farming. I'm doing ministry, and I get to come home and look at our beautiful farm and talk to Willie about what he's done that day and eat grass-fed beef and farm-raised pork. And I get to benefit from it, but I am not the hands-on farmer. Although we do have lambs in our basement right now, but we'll save that for another time. But for me, what attracted me to this life is the spiritual practice of hospitality. Okay. So every time we went down to the farm in Mississippi, it's like we ate around the table, and it was things that they had grown. And it was just, it was almost like stepping into another, it was like thin space. It was like stepping into another realm of reality. And it's like, I think in our culture, we go on vacations and we escape, like we're constantly escaping from things. And this way of life is like, you don't have to escape when you live this way. And in fact, for me, what I'm drawn to is the hospitality element of it. So I'd love to talk to you guys a little bit about our pig roast. But for me, my calling and the thing that I learned on my sabbatical, my hobby, I've struggled with like hobbies because I'm just like a big ministry geek and I love working a lot. And on my sabbatical, I was like, this is not sustainable. I need to have like an identity outside of just working all the time and being a pastor and going through, some things in the church like you do, that if you put your identity and worth in your church, you'll get burned real fast. And um I realized that cooking is like, it's my thing, it's my release. And I learned how to bake bread, and every Monday I bake bread, and that's kind of a spiritual practice for me, that like every Monday, whatever happens, I don't know if y'all are like this, if Mondays are crazy for everyone or just over functioners, but like Mondays are usually pretty hectic for me around the church. And knowing that whatever happens on Monday and whatever anyone says on Monday, there will be we will bake bread and we will smother it in butter. And we always do like beans with some kind of meat, like ham. It started with beans and ham hock, but now we just put whatever kind of meat we have into the beans. So it's like, it's our ritual on Monday nights, and it's so grounding. And anyways, I think for me, there's something about, even when we go on vacation, we love to go on vacation occasionally, but you don't really go on vacation as a farmer. Willie might get away 1 week a year. But we don't feel the need to escape. And we hope that when people come to our farm, we love hosting people at our farm, but we hope that when people walk through our doors, that they can sort of like feel a different kind of energy there. And I think that's what I feel most passionate about.
That is amazing. There's so many things I want to unpack a little bit here and there. Let me start by saying that as you described Willie coming from the Northwest and having a different relationship to the land than perhaps other regions or maybe cultures, I'm not even sure how to go with that. I can say this. I did my PhD in the UK, and I've often told Americans that one thing I really value about the way a traditional kind of British the traditional British imagination seems to do a better job of naming things than we do here in America. Houses might have a name besides their simple street number and address. A field, a grove, a forest might have a name. And the phrase or the words, the back 40, is such an American thing, like the back 40 acres, this back plot of land assigned, is described more by the numbers rather than being given a name, seems to kind of denote the fact that it has a less of a sense of identity to it. It's more about the utility of the land rather than the place. When I say place, I'm thinking of a thick reality between not just a geography, but the culture and everything, the interrelationships that create it to be a textured reality. So I think I understand a little bit what you're saying with the people perhaps in the Northwest. And maybe having this connection, this intimacy with the land, which it sounds like y'all have done a great job to develop in your own way, following the lead of your mentors. So right now you live on 13 acres, correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Are you moving to another piece of land or just moving house? I heard that somewhere.
Yes, that's the plan.
Yes,
How many acres will you have when you're there?
27 flat acres.
27 flat acres, okay.
So we are very excited because right now we live on a very steep slope. It's all wooded. Our community is called Rockfield. It's covered in rocks. So Willie can't do large animals there. So we're doing it at my in-laws' property. Okay. And they're there part-time, but they're ready to sell it. So we're getting our house ready to sell, and we're going to buy that, and it'll be a big project. But it's an old log cabin. So it's going to be a big project, but I think it's really going to fit this like identity of stepping into something. I mean, when you walk in it, you're like, whoa. I mean, you look like you're a homesteader when you walk in this place.
And it's more inviting the way, for people, for on-farm events and gatherings and things too, as far as accessibility.
Yes, like we live down such a steep driveway. People are freaked out to come down it sometimes.
So when you move, you do currently raise hogs? or you will be. And I understand you're there's a documentary being made about you right now. That's called Willie and Pigs. Is that right?
Yeah,
Right?
Willie plus pigs.
Plus
Yeah.
pig, plus. Okay. Tell me about that a little bit. What's it
Okay.
like for you to raise these animals and then ostensibly you actually eat them as well, correct? You will.
Yeah, if we don't have sausage in our house, the girls kind of freak out at this point.
Girls, including me.
Yeah, yeah,
Mostly me. Well, also the girls. But this is probably the biggest fight in our house. It's like sell it before we have our own part of it.
I gotcha. So talk to me about that. What's that like? Because a little anecdote for you is that my wife and her college friends came and visited one time at my in-laws we're farmers and they have a farm in Illinois and they went outside. They said, we're going to go get some stuff ready for dinner. And my wife and her sister went outside and they go, where are you going? And they said, we're going to go to the garden. And some of these gals had never gardened and they walked outside and they started digging up potatoes. And this one woman said, oh my gosh. And she literally said, as she was pulling potatoes out of the earth, she goes, this is changing my life. And then she says, let's put these back. I don't want to take too many that we're not going to eat. Like all of a sudden, just that one act made life and food more precious. Mm-hmm. Now, that's 12 years ago or so. Now, I mean, this is like a mini homesteader herself. Like this lady, it changed her life, right? So being close to your food sources, I mean, it can be, I mean, it heightens the awareness for grace and gratitude. But what's it like for you, Willie, to raise these hogs?
Potato story first.
Sure, yeah.
You mentioned potatoes, and I think that one of my conversion moments, so we had already bought our land, but we owned it a year or two before we built on it. And Willie had planted purple potatoes, and we had a miscarriage earlier that year.
I'm sorry.
And sorry. One of my church members left a flower on our door. We were still living in town. And it was like bitter winter. Like the comfort of what had happened was that we got snowed in for a week right after I found out. So I like had a week to kind of hide, and I needed that because, you know, like ministry is a pretty public existence. But we got snowed in for a week, and I was really grateful. But a church member came to the church, she's actually a staff person's spouse, but she dropped off this like beautiful like lily, or I can't remember what it was. I wish I could remember what kind of flower it was, but she said, remember that spring always comes after the winter.
Oh, yeah.
And then that spring, Willie had planted potatoes, and we went out there and we started digging up these potatoes. And it was like, it felt like an Easter egg hunt. And we kept finding these like beautiful, have you ever had purple potatoes? They're so cool.
I have, yeah.
So like we're picking out these beautiful purple potatoes out of the land. And I don't know, I just like believed it that spring had come.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I don't know how to describe it, but I think that was a like confirmation that we were on the right path.
It was almost like, it feels like a natural parable, a moment of teaching,
Yes.
right? Is that fair to say?
Yes, like so it was bigger than me, whatever happened.
Yes. Living close to nature's rhythms teaches us about so much, I think. Mm-hmm. Willie, say more to me about the raising of hogs and things, and then I want to come back and talk to Megan about hospitality, if you don't mind. Tell me about the pigs.
Well, the land for sure is definitely full of parables. And I feel like there's not, that the good segue is that the hogs, so the current documentary being filmed, Emily Cooper's the name of the producer, she is doing it, is filming, taking pictures in cycles throughout the pig's life. So from the raising them, the rotating of them, and then she's going to, and then take them into the processors the next step in a couple of weeks, which is, it's a relationship, from the get-go. And then she's going to finish the documentary in the spring, speaking of spring, when the new ones come in, because when the new little pigs come in again, it makes you start feeling okay about the cycle again. So it's kind of an interesting feeling that happens there. But the girls got used to, I think. It took them a little while, as it would any kid, and as it does still me yet. The child in me is that, you get so close to the way they're raised. I'm rotationally grazing. They're eating acorns, they're eating persimmons, they're eating walnuts, they're roots and shoots. But you have to keep moving them. They have to keep moving, or else they do tear up the land and the roots and things like that, and are destructive. And it's a far over the hill from us. There's a the factory farm doing the opposite, and it's madness, of the commercial system of animal treatment and things, and that's why I think there's this like movement happening for plant-based, meat, which I get why that's happening, but at the same time, the land does. That's part of what the documentary is about. Is that the land does need animals. I mean, buffalo used to roam through here. The whole key is they have to continuously move.
Rotational grazing.
Yeah, and they can't be on one piece for so long afterwards for different things the microbes to break down everything. And it's a beautiful thing. So the piece of ground across the creek now, one of the reasonings to moving over there, because there's, as Wendell Berry would say, a lot of fertility on a north slope, and I have used the pigs through those woods to get rid of an invasive pear tree that came in after poor logging and things like that. And you do get to see that regeneration happening because they draw up seed bank. Seeds can be in the ground for a couple hundred years dormant, but they draw that up. They eat a lot of the invasives, and then they leave their manure and things like that for fertility purposes. But you start seeing like beetles come in, dung beetles, and Johnny Ray is big into showing that the importance of dung beetles and things like that in the manure piles that draw that down and help sequester, build the nutrients down, the nitrogen, the carbon, and sequestration and all that. So yeah, I think across the creek is like the silvopasture thing I'm doing, so it lends itself towards multi-species farming. And the importance in this to me is you said early on, this whole idea of how long it takes from a destructive piece of land for nature to be regenerated. And on that piece of land, there's been 3 or 4 different owners. It's been through all these phases of like hay, corn and soy, and then someone put in an alfalfa, and then it went dormant, and then got these invasive pear trees over there that grew like bamboo, snuffed everything out. Well, just in 2 years, I planted these wildflower strips on a 15-acre piece, and there's 130 species in those wildflower strips that came up on their own. I didn't reseed. And then I have these 40-foot grazing strips in between those for the animals, the cows and the pigs occasionally, and then eventually chickens and things like that. But so I'm planting this 3-tiered system that naturally was supposed to happen there anyway. It's the soil and grasses, and then the mid-tier kind of wildflowers, shrubs, making a way for the 3-tier system of the canopy. And so I'm planting chestnuts and persimmons in those spaced right for shade, for fodder, and then for you-pick things over time. So there's this short, mid, long-term cycle. And I've been presenting on that recently too. Just I think we borrowed a lot of our theological ideas even from a 3-tiered system. And so I feel like just naturally, because we were in it without the kind of thought processes we have at our hand now, and things. So, but yeah, one last thing on that is that it is a natural progression for a neighbor economy, which I guess is similar to the gift economy, but I like to call it the neighbor economy. Of course, there's a lot of books coming out now about like how finding the mother tree. Avatar was inspired from it, but where the fungi on the trees on the soil level are communicating with like trees from a mile away or some crazy thing. But I think that this happens. It high phase out, if you will, to literal like human neighbors. Because my first couple. They're seeing what I'm doing, and they were the first to make orders, and now like it's little things are happening. Like neighbor gave the twins to these two lambs is the most recent thing out of the blue. And the other one who called me up and said, hey, he doesn't get around too good. He said, my faucet's freezing. And so there's, can you come, fix this for me real quick? And so these little things that are happening in this neighbor economy too, just naturally. And I think that comes from an original land kind of ethic, relationship, as well.
I think you're right. There's so much about whether it's gift economy, I like your phrase, neighbor economy, there's so much of everything you're talking about is based on a deep understanding of how things relate to one another. Wendell Berry says somewhere, I know that it's in a book called The Art of the Commonplace that's edited by Norman Wurzba. Are y'all familiar with Norman Wurzba's work? Okay. I'm a big fan of, highly influenced by Norman Wurzba's work. At any rate, Berry talks about how, when you have a tractor and it plows a field, it takes, a non-renewable resource to run the tractor. And then what it expels from itself is something that will also not be easily received into the world. Like there's going to be something lasting pollutant for some time. But whereas when you use an animal, the animal eats from the ground, right? And then what it expels becomes more fertilizer for the ground. And then when its body expires, when it dies, its body itself will feed and then also go to the ground. And so it becomes like a more sustainable cycle. One thing gives way to another, to another. I like to call it reciprocal hierarchy, right? Like it's not a straight top-down hierarchy. Like we receive and we give, and it goes back and forth, and we reciprocate. And like my tomato plants will do better when I harvest from them, but they'll do better when I give back to them too. It's beautiful stuff that you're working on, and you have a sensitivity. I can tell you're a musician. And I can just tell it by, I bet you come up with some great inspirational music, and not inspirational music, but inspired music from working on the land.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got this, one of the few technologies I use is my phone that I carry in my pocket because I need to take pictures often. I need to write down poem ideas, essay ideas, book ideas. I hardly ever get around to a majority of them, but song ideas is definitely at the top of that. That just naturally, pop up as you're walking through the land and listening and just trying to be there, present. But it's reciprocity is a good word you use. Coming across that a lot because regenerative is this kind of hot word, but really it's what we're doing is restorative farming in hopes that it's a reciprocity based, human community that's building too, which it is. But I think that it's not, and like you said, the land, just from the manure level, the whole thing there is like it's not being piled up. It's like spread out evenly, so where all things can feast from it and then give back to us. Because what happens was there may be a little bit of gases that come up from like each manure pile, but at the same time, it's done in such a way that the root systems grow stronger and bigger, which means that the blades on the grasses and the plants and stuff grow thicker and larger, which sequester more carbon and create more oxygen and things. So it definitely makes up more than it does pollute. So it's
Yeah, that's great. There's so much in the scriptures about land. And when you look at the land in the Old Testament, it's never just like patch of dirt. It's a word that means everything that subsists, lives, and supported by it. So it's like this whole thing. And I bring that up because thinking of Wurzba, he talks about in his book on the Sabbath that the land is offered Sabbath in the scriptures. And in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, there's even like a warning from God to the people. Like, if you don't do these things, we're going to take you out of the land so that the land can have its Sabbath. It deserves it too. It deserves its rest, its restoration. And in that same book, Megan, he talks a lot about how Sabbath and all of these justice issues can be applied to the home. And that's where he really talks about hospitality. So I'm interested in hearing more what you said about how hospitality is something that is part of this internal household economy that is part of what your world is and what's so important in your world, from farm to your home. So tell me more about how hospitality has been a huge feature.
Well, one thing I need to interject one other thing
Go
first. When
ahead.
you talk
Sure.
about the neighbors, um, a big part of our story and our land is that we moved there in part. We moved to Bowling Green because I got called to the church here, but we bought our land because we had several friends that lived in that on Blue Level Road. We used to call ourselves the Blue Level Mafia. So we started attending a book group before we even built our home out there. And we read a book called The Sustainable Farm and Homestead. And it was so powerful because it was all about how you respect the land and get to know the land. And instead of being like, I feel like eating tomatoes, I'm going to plant tomatoes, you pay attention to like what grows well here and you adapt to what your land does.
That's a thought. We
Yeah.
adapt.
Yeah. And so that was like a little bit mind blowing for me, the book that kind of described what our relationship with the land is really, how it can be more sustainable. But the other piece of that is that, we started having these conversations and going to these book groups. And I suppose it was in a time before we had the political divides that we have now. But like when I look back at it, I am more and more like in awe of what that was. Because people who attended that, there were several that were from the Orthodox Church. There were some there who were like, what do you call it? Uh, they're preparing for the end times. Like
Preppers.
yes, like there were people there from such different ends of the spectrum, and it didn't matter at all because we were reading this book about our land, and Dolores does bell peppers well, and you can get bacon from Debbie and Braden, and like it didn't matter at all because the land united us, and so now when he was talking about the neighbors. So Willie knows all the neighbors. Something I admire about Willie is like, I'm always in a hurry. I've got things to do and my to-do list and blah, blah, blah. And Willie has taken the time to really get to know our neighbors. And there is a relationship of respect and I guess reciprocity, if that's maybe the word of the day. But like, our neighbor directly behind us is one of the few people closest to us that we had probably the least relationship with. And he is a Church of Christ pastor. And I think it's so funny that, like, our fields, this woman disciples of Christ pastor and this male Church of Christ pastor have our pastures that meet up against each other.
Pastor and pasture, I like that. Yeah.
But during COVID, it was amazing. We'd sit on our back deck and he would have church at their house and they would be singing a cappella.
Yeah.
It was incredible. In the holler, it was so cool. But
Did you
anyway,
just say holler in
yeah,
the
we live in
holler?
a holler.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much.
So he recently invited Willie to start rotating his cows on his land. So when we move, Lawrence, who's behind us right now, will be next to us. So he'll still be our neighbor. He'll be an even closer neighbor, actually, when we move. But the fact that Lawrence just offered up, he's like, hey, I think you should come rotate your cows here. Like he was saying, people are kind of paying attention, getting interested, and it just doesn't matter what you believe on 100 other different levels. If you care about the land and where your food comes from and sustainability, I mean, it's just so fascinating to me how talking about the land can bring people together who otherwise would never sit around the same table. And that's been really beautiful. So even though our book club, we don't have relationships with a lot of those people anymore because they either moved away or we've kind of lost touch and it didn't all turn out the way maybe we would have expected it to when we started the book club. But I don't know, it's really important roots that we have that we know we could call Dolores and Wayne, that we have these relationships. But
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry.
No. Go ahead. Thank you,
I was
Willie.
just gonna say, I think there's this innate common ground, literally that where there's this spirituality that's sort of baked in, ingrained, and so this newest relationship with the Church of Christ neighbor, And of course, there's all kinds of the political spectrum surrounding us. But the one thing with that is that it's something. There's these necessities. I think of there is this deep need and want to treat the land property properly, and when it's being treated properly, where it's an increase in soil and life. There's this piece that where they see it is also producing good food in a real way. That I feel like that's the melding that happens. And so, yeah, it's these great relationships that develop.
Oh, tell him the bank thing. He came in my office today and he's like, I walked in the bank and all these tellers I didn't know were like, hey, you got any honey with
Yeah, no, there's these things that happen like that. And in all different communities, like the music community, the church community, the bank community, there must be, there's numerous of different types of communities here, just locally, that where that's the common theme, that's the common thing is just this healthy nutrition for the land. That's important, and for them too. And so, yeah, I feel like it's like everything else just kind of fades away when there's that connective tissue.
Well, we are all dust, and dust from the dust, and to the dust we shall return. We all need to eat. We all, I mean, so yeah, this is a great way to strip down all the things that we artificially put up between us.
Right.
By getting closer to the land, you get closer to humanity.
Yes.
And hospitality is part of that. I still really want to hear about you said you're going to do a hog roast, is that right? Or something?
So, we've done it twice. Okay. So a year and a half ago, I suppose, one of my church members, so we always have a barbecue once or twice a year here at the church. We have a little outdoor picnic, and we have a group of guys in the church that love the art of grilling and staying up all night with the animal. And so one of those lay people who also, like, he and I are working on, we just did this, we're doing a huge building project. He's one of my key leaders. He's always been just sort of a ride or die by my side person in the church. And he said to me, just off the cuff, when he was barbecuing 2 years ago. So this is probably like in May, because we usually do it in May and September. So at our May barbecue, he said, yeah, on my bucket list is to do a whole hog roast. And I was like, oh, we should do that. I don't know what I can't believe. The reason we did it is because I had no idea what we were getting into, is the truth. Okay? But I was like, we can make that happen, right? And so we literally put this together in like 2 or 3 weeks, the first year we did it. Mm. So the hog roast is the animal is raised on the land. They kill it on the land. They process it. They cook it. We eat it. Those last few steps all happen within about 48 hours. Mm. And so when we did it the first year, I was not at all prepared. Like, I had to go to town and get like street tacos, because I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that people would be here for like 2 days, But this year we learned after the first year, and this year it was just like have you ever watched that show, The Bear?
Yeah, it's like my spirit show.
Oh my gosh.
It ministers to me and my family. My sister's a chef, and so, yeah, I get that.
Okay, so we're obsessed with that show, and we felt like we got to live it a little bit at our hog roast this year. So what we did, what do they call it, like family, when they have the meal?
Yeah, family. Mm-hmm.
Or the cooks. So
yeah.
Staff. So we basically did a bunch of family meals.
Uh-huh.
So we did on the first night, we always do it the 4th of July. So the first night we had a bunch of steaks in the freezer from one of our cows. And then I made a whole bunch of salads. I brought a few friends together, and the night before we prepped all these homemade salads. So we did steaks the first night for all the people out there working.
And that friend was good at making those.
And yeah, and the friend so everything was delegated. Like, I don't know if you've seen the movie The Big Chill, but that's what it felt like this summer. We were just all there. And also there's
Yeah.
no cell service because so Willie's parents are gone in the summertime. They fight fires out west. And so they were gone in the summertime. So they didn't even have the internet hooked up. So it was like 30 people in one place in nature with no cell service.
Mhm.
The only purpose being this hog
To make
roast.
this happen, yeah.
And I just like looked around and I couldn't believe it. People were folding laundry because there were like towels to wash. People were cooking. People who didn't know each other were visiting. The guys just sat around the pig the whole time. Like it was amazing. And then the culmination of it, where the rest of us were just like done and exhausted, was like 100 people come who are Willie's pork customers. And everybody brings a side, and we serve the pig. And it is the most incredible potluck you will ever see because people know, like, this is a farm raised pig.
One of the neighbors brought a fresh chicken that they had baked that they raised.
That they raised.
Homemade ice cream. I mean, just
Fresh
kind of
baked
this
bread.
level of-
Every single thing on the table, like, had a story behind it, basically. And it was just, oh my, just abundance. Like, so much food. People are so excited to be there, kids running around, even to like what I said was everybody did what they were good at. Those of us who loved cooking were cooking. The guys who were obsessed with roasting were roasting. One of the kids from my youth group, apparently at church camp the whole week before, all he talked about was the pig roast and how excited he was for the pig roast. So several parents brought their kids out because they wanted them to see the process from start to finish.
I think that I should probably be looking forward to my invitation this year in the mail to this thing, right?
Yeah, come on.
I mean, what you just described, look, 30 people in the middle of the woods or whatnot with no cell phone service cooking. That sounds like the recipe for how God might show up to something.
Oh my gosh.
Or maybe that God's always there and we just need to turn off stuff and pay attention. But,
Yeah.
and just think about no, I'm just kidding, but all the beauty that you described there is so just metaphorical as well, right? Like people brought their best together, and the bringing it all together was better than what anyone could do on their own. I mean, it's just so lovely what you're describing.
Yes, like even to the point that at the end of the night, we were all exhausted. And one of our friends who just moved here from Minneapolis, but they relocated to our region because of the community, right?
Oh, that's great.
So they left the city of Minneapolis, came and live outside of Bowling Green now. And
They can-
they work from
so
home.
able to-
They're not farm people, right? And he brought, I didn't know this. He brought all these fireworks and he's like,
Nobody knew till it was dark, the end of the night, everything was over. And I was like, well, I don't know, Chris, let me see what you got.
and so Chris is like, they don't sell these. These are illegal in Minnesota. And so like Chris and Willie drive the little
the middle
gator
of the
to the
field.
middle of the field,
Yeah.
and they are like children running out, lighting the thing, running back. It goes off. It's like a humongous light show, right? And even to like Chris, who wasn't cooking, was not going to skin a pig, right? Like, but he brought the fun when we were all like, oh my gosh, I'm comatose, I'm
Yeah,
exhausted.
yeah.
And all of a sudden fireworks started going off. It was just like incredible to see. It was incredible. And so, yeah.
That sounds incredibly holy to me. It sounds, well, it sounds like a bit of the restored world that we look forward to in Christian spirituality. To me, I mean, it sounds like the healing of community, the healing coming through healing land or flourishing community, flourishing land, and bringing everything to the table, grace at the table.
Can I say how much church is like the way we do community at church equips us for the way we do community on the land.
Okay.
So, several of our hog roasters are friends through the church, right? So the first night, Willie is in a band, and they went back and forth if they were going to have band practice on the first night because we're like, oh, maybe the band should play while we're eating. But then it was like, no, there's too much going on. So we ended up just kind of inviting the band. But apparently one member of the band had been putting out these like bass player needed or some kind of person in the band needed notes around town. And a stranger ends up showing up the first night to the middle of nowhere. And he's like a 60-year-old man who drove from like an hour away. He walks up and he's like, I'm here for It was the most bizarre, insane thing. He's like, I'm here to meet Mel.
Yeah,
So he's here and he has the drummer's name and he's like, it's a jazz band. I'm like, oh well, my husband's the banjo player. He's like, no, it's a jazz band. I'm like, yeah, it's a jazz band with the banjo. He's like, well, okay, can I talk to Willie? I'm like, you can, but he's in the back, like killing the pig.
He's skinning a pig. It sounds like a Kingdom thing or a Kentucky thing. I'm not sure.
Right. And then he's like, well, let me call my wife. And I was like, well, your phone won't work here. And like, but the people who are sitting around that aren't killing the pig, but getting ready to process the pig are all my church people. And I'm like, this is coffee hour on Sunday morning, right? Like, we know how to welcome a stranger. And so we were like, stay and eat. And he was, I think, totally freaked out by us. So he stayed, and I did get a picture of him because, like, what was his name? Mark?
I can't remember.
Because he was like the character. Because Mark just showed up and could not understand what was going on. He's like, but I'm here for band practice. And one of my church members, who is like a musician, he's like, Mark doesn't get it. Like, band practice is not happening tonight. But anyway, awesome. Like the whole thing of like community and hospitality, I think that's something we share in common, and that our communities have melded well together, is this idea of welcome is what we do as a church, and it's what we do as a farm too.
And I think Mike, that was on his bucket list, for the hawk roast, he ended up, man, it was such a wonderful, writing a poem, which I don't know if he's ever done before, and then sent it out to everyone that was there. And it was just this thing about the pig and the people, and just a wonderful kind of a neat, and we were all riding, everybody that left there, we felt this like great. I mean, there was a super moon that first night too, so there was these other natural things happening that were kind of serendipitous.
Rained, but then it cleared up right as
and then there's this beautiful like this sunset right as everything was like starting to happen, because it was raining. We didn't know if it would happen, and then all of a sudden it broke, and there's this beautiful sunset over everything. I mean, it was just these kind of relative pieces that were poetic and too that were happening. But yeah, I think there was just this welling. One of my best friend at Divinity School, Teddy Smith, who had passed away we always used to have these great conversations. He was a good theologian and things, and he was a better thinker and a writer than me. But I had my talents kind of in nature. I grew up in a logging family, which is ironic, but I was raised in the forest, and maybe that's where the deep love was birthed. I always did love nature, but I went through this agricultural thing and FFA, and came to the regenerative side naturally, because I love poetry and nature. So it was a good segue. But I say that because we went to a thing at Vanderbilt once, this talk that Maya Angelou was giving. And she had said, we can't be friends unless we are equals. And Teddy, we couldn't have been more opposite in appearance, but we were brothers. We had these great conversations about the natural world and theology. And there is this thing that happens, this melding of community that happens when you meet the natural world in its setting, as it is supposed, as much as you can be in its setting. You meet it there, and then sit around in it with the human community. There's this equality that exists that I wished we could see exists in the little small things. I personally think that's what Jesus was talking about. The meek shall inherit the earth. I think it's the microbes. I think that those are the things that drive everything. But if we could see them as sort of equals in ways too, I think that we. And then I'll end on this. I had ran into Keb Mo, famous blues musician in Nashville.
I know who Keb Mo is. I'm familiar. Yeah,
he loves the banjo. It's one of his favorite instruments and stuff. But anyways. He had said, I'll never forget a line he had spoke about, and he was talking to someone else. It wasn't me in the room, but he had said to this person, I don't think we should focus I don't think one of them that we should focus on when it comes to racism. I think that should be like third on the list or whatever it was. He said, if we could care for nature, this planet, this isn't verbatim, obviously, but he said something like, if we can care for the planet properly, and all these things are more equitable, we would by default naturally take care of our brothers, sisters, one another, regardless of color and diversity. It would be just this natural diversity of an equitable process that happens if we were to do that first.
There's this bit in one of the papal encyclicals by Benedict XVI, where basically, and Patriarch Bartholomew, the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church, said a similar phrase, where they both said, you cannot have one without the other. To love, if you hate the non-human world, you will hate humanity, and if you hate humanity, you'll hate the non-human world. And I saw that in a place of abject poverty on the island of Hispaniola. The social issues there were incredible, but these were people who were by origin Haitian, but taken into the Dominican Republic to work sugar cane, and but they had been there so long they really held at slave wages, and it's an incredibly terrible social thing. But they were displaced people in ways, and they seemed to treat their landscape poorly. And when inquired about that, the person who hosted said, well, they've come to believe it all to be garbage because they believe that they are garbage. Like they've been treated so poorly. And that was kind of an object lesson of what the Pope was saying. But I get it. There's this deep kinship that we have to have, for we are earthlings, with the non-human world, and if we denounce any part of God's creation, we'll find our ways of denouncing others. I think that's just my little 2 cents. Listen, I've had you for far too long. You've been so gracious, but I like to ask questions like to kind of wrap up. Do y'all have any great book recommendations, and it could be something you read a long time ago or something you read now on this topic, or any others that you think might be helpful to people who might listen to this, or what is something that's speaking to you now? I mean, I'm so open to receiving ideas for digging deeper and expanding.
Okay, I've got one while he's thinking, because he'll have lots of good farming books. This is not a farming book, but I went to Chautauqua this summer and heard this person speak, and her book is called The Right Kind of Wrong, and I'm doing a sermon series on it right now. And it's The Science of Failing Well. And everything she talks about, I'm like, this is what the church has to do. We have to learn how to fail better, faster, more often. Because
and who's the author?
Atkinson. But then I came back and talked to Willie about it, and like, that's what farming is. It's like you try it, it works, it doesn't work, like, and then you move on, right? It's like a series of fails until you get it right.
Right.
That's
so often, I feel like so many people are so afraid of failing, right? Like really afraid. But that's a cool book. I'll look into that myself. Did you like Chautauqua, by the way?
Yes.
I've never been, so I was thinking about that.
I'm going back this summer. I'm hooked.
Cool. Very cool. Willie, you got any cool recs?
Sean Colvin was there. So.
Oh, yeah. And Sean Colvin was there.
That doesn't hurt.
I brought my best friend. And then we found out Sean Colvin was there. And it's like his favorite songwriter.
One of them, yeah, for sure.
So, is that the one who Sonny Came Home? Like that was their pop, the pop crossover?
Yeah, probably one of my least favorite songs of hers, just because it was the popular one. You know what I mean?
Right. Sure. Yeah.
As far as honoring the ancestors, it's just one thing I think I strive for, is that there was this deep intuitive process that we've lost in the last couple generations, where we used to know how to do certain things, or what to eat and not to eat even. But anyways, I mentioned that because the obvious one is braiding sweetgrass, which I mentioned her earlier with her new book, Serviceberry. And sometimes it's hard to think about other books when you're currently reading a particular one.
That's okay. That sounds interesting to me. So
yeah, but braiding sweetgrass, have you read that one yet?
No, I haven't.
Oh man, I highly recommend that one then, for sure. Yeah.
Oh, and one more, Blue Zone's Cookbook by Dan Buechner. Is that how you say his name? He did the National Geographic series, but as far as like making your food and living intentionally, so good.
Okay, very good. Listen, I appreciate you both in the work that you do. I'm always have deep respect for people who are in the clergy, because I do know what that work is like. And so thank you for what you do, Megan. Willie, you share a lot of my heartbeat. My wife and I love to get our hands in the soil And just the ideas and then the practical work of it is something that brings life in our home, and we wish we could do more. So thank you for what you do. And it sounds as though that your worlds come together in a beautiful spiritual lesson of this podcast. The connection you have with the earth is coming out in ways for the common good of your community, and it's quite obvious there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for
And
having us.
I'm going to be looking for that invitation in the mail.
Mark down the 4th of July, y'all.
All right. Well, thank you. God bless you.
Okay, take
You
care.
too.
Bye-bye.